Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Georgia. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested to know what places and what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. Benton County, Georgia, 1844. A year that would mark the beginning of a story that many have tried to forget. The Harkcourt plantation stood 3 miles east of Whitesburg, nestled between rolling hills and dense pine forests that seemed to swallow all sound. The main house, with its imposing white columns and sprawling verandas, housed 2 sisters, whose names would later be whispered with a mixture of pity and dread throughout the county. The Harkcourt sisters, Amelia and Charlotte, had inherited the plantation after their parents perished in a carriage accident on the road to Atlanta in 1841. The sisters became the sole owners of over 800 acres of cotton fields and the 37 individuals who worked them. According to county records from that period, the plantation was one of the most productive in western Georgia, despite being managed by 2 unmarried women in their 20s. What made the Harkcourt case particularly unusual was not just the circumstances of their inheritance, but what happened in the 3 years that followed. Documents from the Benton County Courthouse, recovered during a renovation in 1962, revealed a series of unusual purchases and transactions that preceded the events that would later shock the community. In December of 1843, Amelia Harkcourt, the elder sister, traveled to the slave market in Savannah. According to sales records preserved in the Georgia Historical Society archives, she purchased a man for a sum considerably above market value. The man was listed as Elijah, aged 25, exceptionally literate, previously employed as a house servant. What was unusual about this purchase was not just the price, but the note attached to the record. Buyer insistent on this particular individual despite availability of others at lower price. The record caught the attention of historian Dr. Margaret Wells during her research on antebellum Georgia in 1958. In her unpublished notes, found after her death, she wrote, "The Harkcourt purchase stands out as anomalous. Female plantation owners rarely traveled alone to make such transactions, and the specificity of her selection suggests prior knowledge or recommendation. What happened after Elijah's arrival at the Harkcourt plantation remained largely undocumented for nearly 6 months. The sisters maintained their standing in local society, attending church services at White Oak Baptist Church every Sunday, hosting occasional dinner parties, and continuing to manage their business affairs with apparent success. Then came the spring of 1844, according to the Journal of Dr. Samuel Thorne, the county physician whose records were discovered in the attic of his great-granddaughter's home in 1961. He was called to the Harkcourt plantation on 3 separate occasions between April and June. His first entry, dated April 12th, reads, "Called to attend to Miss Charlotte Harkcourt, patient presenting with morning sickness, fatigue, and emotional distress. Examination confirms suspicions of pregnancy, approximately 10 weeks. Patient became hysterical upon confirmation, insisted on absolute secrecy. Sister Amelia unusually calm." The second entry, dated May 23rd, is perhaps more telling. Returned to Harkcourt plantation. Miss Amelia now exhibiting identical symptoms to sister. Examination confirms pregnancy, approximately 12 weeks. Both sisters refused to identify father. Household atmosphere noticeably tense, servants avoiding eye contact. Something deeply troubling about this situation. His final entry regarding the sisters, dated June 18th, simply states, "Summoned urgently to Harkcourt plantation. Found household in disarray. Miss Charlotte confined to bed, claims to hear voices. Miss Amelia refuses to allow me to examine sister, seems paranoid. Offered to arrange discreet care in Atlanta for both their conditions. offer firmly rejected. Advised by Miss Amelia not to return unless specifically requested. The doctor never received another request from the Harkcourt plantation. The summer of 1844 in Benton County was unusually hot and dry. Cotton withered in the fields, and tension grew among the plantation owners as crops failed. Yet, according to ledgers from that period, the Harkcourt plantation continued to prosper. Their cotton somehow survived the drought, which led to whispers among neighboring planters. Thomas Blackwood, owner of the adjacent property, wrote in a letter to his brother in Virginia, "The Harkcourt fields remain green, while ours wither and die." The sisters are rarely seen in town now. Their overseer claims they've developed new irrigation methods, but refuses to elaborate. The hands from their plantation no longer socialize with ours on Sundays. Something unnatural is happening there. As summer turned to fall, the sisters withdrew completely from society. They stopped attending church services, declined all invitations, and conducted business solely through intermediaries. According to town records, Charlotte Harkcourt was last seen in public in early July, while Amelia continued to make occasional brief appearances until September. It was during this period that Elijah Brooks, the man purchased by Amelia, became the subject of speculation. Martha Jenkins, a house servant from the neighboring Wilson plantation, gave a statement years later that was recorded in a collection of oral histories compiled by the Federal Writers Project in 1937. She recalled, "People said Mr. Elijah wasn't treated like the others at Harkcourt Place. He had his own quarters attached to the main house. Some said he had books, fine clothes. Others said he was practicing things he learned from the old country before his grandparents were brought over. I remember my mother warning me never to walk past the Harkcourt property after dark, especially when the moon was full. The first concrete indication that something was severely wrong at the Harkcourt plantation came in late October 1844. A report filed with the local sheriff, discovered during courthouse archival work in 1967, detailed a disturbance reported by a traveler passing near the property. The report states, "Complainant alleges hearing a woman's screams from Harkcourt property while traveling past at approximately 9 in the evening." Upon approaching the gate to offer assistance, complainant was confronted by an armed overseer who denied any disturbance and threatened bodily harm if complainant did not leave immediately. No action taken due to jurisdiction of property owner over household affairs. November brought the first frost to Benton County, and with it, a series of events that could no longer be contained within the Harkcourt plantation boundaries. On November 12th, according to church records, Reverend James Wilson of White Oak Baptist Church rode to the plantation after receiving a disturbing letter from Charlotte Harkcourt. The contents of the letter were never made public, but the Reverend's diary, discovered among church archives in 1956, contains a troubling entry. Called to Harkcourt plantation today. Found conditions shocking. The house in disarray, with strange symbols drawn on doors and windows. Miss Charlotte greatly changed, physically and mentally. Her condition advanced, yet she speaks of cleansing and preparation. Miss Amelia refused to see me, remaining locked in the East Wing. When I expressed concern about their spiritual and physical welfare, Miss Charlotte laughed in a manner that chilled my blood. "I fear they have fallen under some dark influence," prayed with the house servants who seemed terrified. Elijah Brooks was nowhere to be seen, though his presence was evident in books of foreign origin scattered throughout the study. 3 days after the Reverend's visit, a fire broke out in one of the Harkcourt cotton barns. According to county records, several neighboring planters responded to help extinguish the blaze. Thomas Blackwood was among them, and in a subsequent letter to his brother, he described a disturbing scene. "The barn was fully engulfed when we arrived, too far gone to save. What struck me was the behavior of the Harkcourt workers. They stood at a distance, making no effort to fight the fire. Some appeared to be chanting. Amelia Harkcourt watched from an upstairs window, unmoving, even as the flames cast a hellish glow across the property. I caught a glimpse of Charlotte being led across the upper hallway by a male figure I presumed to be Brooks. Both sisters were heavy with child, their conditions impossible to disguise. What business they have carrying on in such a state, unmarried and isolated, I cannot imagine. But it was the smell that most disturbed me, not just burning cotton and wood, but something foul and unnatural beneath it. Several of my men refused to approach the main house when I suggested checking for additional fires. As November progressed, the situation at the Harkcourt plantation became increasingly unstable. According to testimony given years later by Josephine Miller, a house servant who fled the plantation that month, strange rituals were being conducted in the cellar of the main house. Her account, recorded in 1872 when she was an elderly woman, states, Miss Amelia and Miss Charlotte had Mr. Elijah reading from books with strange writing. They would sit in a circle drawn on the floor, with candles burning black smoke. They made us bring soil from different parts of the plantation and mix it with other things I won't speak of. The sisters would drink something Mr. Elijah prepared, then speak in voices that weren't their own. They said the children they carried would be born with special purpose, that they would bring forth something powerful from the soil of Harkcourt land. When Miss Charlotte started carving symbols into the door frames with her own fingernails, I knew I couldn't stay another night. The exact number of workers who fled the plantation during this period is unknown, but county records indicate at least 12 individuals sought shelter or employment elsewhere between November 18th and December 10th, despite the severe penalties for leaving without permission. The climax of the Harkcourt story came on the night of December 15th, 1844. According to sheriff's reports and witness testimonies collected afterward, residents of neighboring properties reported hearing unearthly wailing coming from the direction of the Harkcourt plantation shortly after midnight. The sounds were described as neither fully human nor animal, and continued for nearly an hour before abruptly stopping. The following morning, smoke was seen rising from the main house. Thomas Blackwood, along with the sheriff and several other men, arrived to find the east wing of the house burned to ruins. The western portion remained intact but abandoned. There was no sign of either sister. The official report, filed December 16, 1844, states, "No bodies recovered from burned section of house. Bedroom in west wing shows signs of childbirth having occurred recently. Blood-stained sheets and implements. No infants found on premises. Elijah Brooks missing, along with approximately 15 workers. Remaining staff in state of extreme agitation, many unable to provide coherent testimony. House contains evidence of unorthodox practices inconsistent with Christian observance." Investigation ongoing. The investigation continued through the winter of 1845, but no trace of Amelia or Charlotte Harkcourt was ever officially found. Elijah Brooks likewise vanished from all records. The Harkcourt property was eventually sold at auction, the proceeds held in escrow for 7 years as required by law before being claimed by a distant cousin from South Carolina. The story might have ended there, consigned to local legend, except for a curious discovery made in 1959 during construction of a highway that cut through what had once been the northernmost section of Harkcourt land. Workers excavating for the roadbed uncovered a small wooden box buried approximately 6 feet deep. Inside were 2 identical silver lockets containing braided hair, one dark, one light, and a folded piece of paper with text written in a language experts at the University of Georgia could not immediately identify. The items were sent to the State Historical Society, but vanished from their collection sometime in the mid-1960s. The official explanation was clerical error and improper cataloguing, but rumors persisted among staff that the items had been removed deliberately after a researcher became obsessed with their origin. That researcher, Dr. Alan Carmichael, left his position at the Historical Society in 1965. His notes, discovered after he failed to return from a research trip to Benton County in 1968, contained the following passage. The Harkcourt case represents something beyond the conventional understanding of antebellum social transgression. The sisters' apparent relationship with Elijah Brooks, while scandalous in racial terms, masks a deeper and more disturbing purpose. I believe they were attempting to create what their journals refer to as vessels for something that existed in the land itself, something ancient that predated European settlement. The symbols described by witnesses correspond to pre-colonial indigenous markings found at only 3 other sites in North America, all associated with fertility and earth worship rituals. I've traced a lineage that I believe connects to 2 families currently residing in South Georgia. Tomorrow I will attempt to make contact. Dr. Carmichael's vehicle was found abandoned near what had once been the Harkcourt property line. Despite an extensive search, no other trace of him was ever found. In 1969, the last portion of the original Harkcourt land was developed into a subdivision. During the groundbreaking ceremony, construction was briefly halted when workers uncovered what appeared to be the remains of a small structure beneath the soil. A room approximately 10 feet square with walls made of fitted stone, unlike any construction method common to 19th century Georgia. Inside, they found nothing except a layer of ash on the floor and a single phrase carved into the ceiling: "They thrive elsewhere." The structure was demolished to make way for development, its existence noted only in a single paragraph in the local newspaper. The subdivision was completed the following year. Residents reported no unusual occurrences, aside from the uncommonly fertile soil in their gardens and the occasional difficulty in keeping certain plants from overgrowing their intended boundaries. The Harkcourt sisters and Elijah Brooks never reappeared in any official records. No death certificates were issued, no graves marked with their names. They simply vanished from history, leaving behind only fragments and whispers. But in 1871, nearly 3 decades after their disappearance, a traveling photographer passing through a remote area of the Okefenokee swamp reported encountering an unusual settlement, a small community of mixed-race individuals living in isolation, led by elderly twin sisters who refused to have their photographs taken. The photographer noted in his journal that the community's children all shared unusual birthmarks on their left shoulders, described as a pattern resembling interlocked circles. The photographer planned to return with a journalist from Atlanta who expressed interest in the community, but before the expedition could be mounted, the region was hit by massive flooding. When waters receded, no trace of the settlement could be found. And so the story of the Harkcourt sisters fades into the past, neither fully explained nor completely forgotten. Their plantation is now buried beneath highways and housing developments. Their names appear in no school textbooks or official histories. Yet to this day, farmers in western Georgia occasionally unearth strange silver objects in their fields after heavy rains. Small cylindrical containers sealed with wax, containing soil and hair and other materials that defy easy explanation. Most are quietly reburied or discarded, their finders reluctant to attract attention or questions about the provenance of their land. Some things, it seems, are better left undisturbed. Some bloodlines continue to flow, unseen but unbroken, beneath the surface of everyday life. And some practices, forbidden though they may be, never truly disappear. They merely go underground, waiting for the right season to emerge once more. The land remembers what people choose to forget, and the land of the Harkcourt plantation remembers everything. Those with certain birthmarks in southern Georgia still sometimes whisper about their special ancestry when they think no one is listening. They tend gardens that grow with unusual vigor. They seem to know when the weather will change before any forecast. And sometimes, in certain phases of the moon, they gather in places where the soil is particularly dark and rich. What exactly happened between Amelia Harkcourt, Charlotte Harkcourt, and Elijah Brooks in those months of 1844 remains speculation. The nature of the forbidden practices referenced in county records has never been definitively established. The fate of the children the sisters were carrying is unrecorded. But somewhere, perhaps, their descendants continue the work that began on that plantation, a merging of bloodlines for purposes only they understand, a communion with something ancient and patient that resides in the Georgia soil, something that can wait generations for its plans to bear fruit. Listen closely if you find yourself on former Harkcourt land on a quiet night. Some say you can still hear them, not screams but singing. A lullaby in a language older than any nation, sung by voices that sound like sisters, though no sisters have owned that land for over 150 years. In 1952, a graduate student from Emory University named Rebecca Collins began researching unusual birth records in rural Georgia counties for her dissertation on genealogical patterns among isolated communities. Her research led her to the courthouse in what was once Benton County, where she discovered birth certificates from the early 1900s with an unusual notation: Heritage, Harkcourt, Descent. The notation appeared on 17 birth certificates between 1905 and 1927, all from families living within 50 miles of the former Harkcourt plantation. What struck Collins as particularly strange was that none of these families carried the Harkcourt surname, and many appeared to be of mixed racial heritage, unusual for official documentation in that era of strict segregation. Collins tried to locate these families for interviews, but found most had moved away during the Great Migration or the Great Depression. However, she did manage to speak with an elderly woman named Sarah Turner, whose mother had been identified with the Harkcourt descent notation on her 1912 birth certificate. According to Collins's research notes, filed in the Emory University archives and accessed in 1964, Mrs. Turner was initially reluctant to discuss family history, but eventually revealed that her grandmother claimed to be the daughter of the sisters who spoke to the earth. When pressed for clarification, Mrs. Turner explained that family law held that her grandmother and several others had been born to two sisters who had joined with the soil through a man who knew the old ways. Children from these unions were said to possess unusual abilities related to fertility and agriculture. Collins' notes continue. Mrs. Turner demonstrated her family's garden, which exhibited extraordinary productivity despite poor soil conditions. Plants that should not thrive in Georgia's climate grew abundantly. When I remarked on this, Mrs. Turner simply said, "The earth remembers its children." She then showed me a small silver amulet passed down from her grandmother, containing soil and what appeared to be hair of 3 different colors braided together. Mrs. Turner claimed that all descendants of the sisters possessed similar talismans, which they buried and later exhumed when establishing new homes, thereby transplanting their connection to the land. Collins attempted to acquire the amulet for university analysis, but was firmly rebuffed. Her dissertation, when published in 1954, contained only a brief, footnoted reference to the unusual Harkcourt-descended agricultural communities, with no mention of amulets or claimed abilities. When questioned about this omission years later, Collins reportedly replied, "Some knowledge isn't meant for academic dissemination." In 1956, a severe drought affected much of the southeastern United States. Agricultural records from that period, reviewed during a climate study in 1968, revealed an anomalous pattern. Farms within a specific radius of the former Harkcourt plantation maintained crop yields at nearly 80% of normal levels, while surrounding areas averaged only 25 to 30%. Meteorologists noted no significant rainfall differences that would account for this discrepancy. The study's authors concluded soil composition and possible underground aquifer advantages may explain the production differential, though no geological survey has identified such features. Local explanations involving special farming techniques passed down through generations were offered but lack scientific substantiation. What these dry academic reports failed to capture were the nighttime gatherings observed by outsiders during that drought summer, small groups meeting at property boundaries, digging soil from various locations, mixing it with unidentified substances, and burying small objects at the corners of fields. These activities, dismissed by most observers as folk superstition, were documented only in the personal journal of County Agricultural Agent Robert Freeman. Freeman wrote on July 18, 1956, "Witnessed another midnight gathering at the Johnson farm. Approximately 12 individuals, including representatives from the Turner, Moss, Jenkins and Crawford families, all highly successful despite the drought conditions. They gathered soil from each other's land, mixed it in a central vessel with what appeared to be blood, possibly animal, and hair, then redistributed this mixture to be buried at property lines. Participants included both white and colored families, interacting with a familiarity uncommon in our region. When they finished, a woman I believe to be Eleanor Turner recited what sounded like a poem or prayer, though not in any language I recognized. The crops on these farms continue to flourish, while others wither. Scientific explanation eludes me, but I find myself reluctant to investigate too deeply." Freeman requested a transfer 3 weeks later and never publicly discussed his observations. The drought eventually broke, memories faded, and the unusual resilience of certain farms was forgotten by most. But county real estate records from the following decades reveal a curious pattern. Properties owned by families mentioned in Freeman's journal were almost never sold to outsiders. When circumstances forced a sale, family members frequently repurchased the land within a generation, often at considerable financial sacrifice. In 1964, construction began on a reservoir that would flood a portion of what had once been the northeastern section of the Harkcourt plantation. During preliminary excavation, workers discovered an unusual structure approximately 12 feet beneath the surface, a circular stone chamber roughly 20 feet in diameter, with walls composed of fitted stones similar to those found at the subdivision site 5 years later. According to the archaeological survey hastily conducted before the area was flooded, the chamber contains no human remains or artifacts aside from 3 stone basins positioned at equidistant points around the perimeter. The basins contain traces of organic material too degraded for identification. The structure predates European settlement but does not conform to known indigenous building practices in the region. Its purpose remains undetermined. The lead archaeologist, Dr. William Harper, requested additional time for research, but economic pressures led to the continuation of the reservoir project. The chamber now lies beneath 60 feet of water. Dr. Harper's personal notes, discovered among his effects after his death in 1971, contain troubling observations omitted from the official report. The chamber walls are inscribed with symbols matching those described in accounts of the Harkcourt plantation disturbances, particularly those noted by Reverend Wilson and Dr. Carmichael. More disturbing is the discovery that the stone is not native to Georgia. Geological analysis indicates it originated from the West African coastal region. How such material was transported and constructed in this location, predating European contact, defies conventional historical understanding. Most concerning are the trace elements found in the stone basins, human blood of 3 distinct types, preserved through some unknown method that has prevented complete degradation despite the passage of what must be centuries. Harper's final journal entry, dated 2 weeks before his death from an apparent stroke, reads simply, They were here before us. They used the sisters. They are still here. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, the story of the Harkcourt sisters faded further from local memory as development transformed the landscape. The reservoir became a popular recreation area, the subdivision expanded, and highways carved through the former plantation lands. Only in scattered academic references and obscure historical society archives did their names occasionally appear. Then in 1992, an unusual incident briefly revived interest in the Harkcourt legacy. During renovation of one of the oldest homes in the subdivision built on former Harkcourt land, workers discovered a sealed space between walls, a narrow room approximately 3 feet wide and 8 feet long containing a wooden chest. According to police reports, the homeowners, the Michaels family, opened the chest before authorities arrived. They claimed it contained only old papers and dirt, which they discarded before realizing potential historical significance. However, neighbors reported that the Michaels family abruptly put their house on the market days later, selling at a substantial loss and relocating to Washington state without explanation. Journalist Diane Foster from the local newspaper attempted to investigate but found the Michaels unwilling to comment. Her article, published October 12, 1992, quotes an unnamed construction worker who claimed to have glimpsed the chest's contents. It wasn't just papers. There were these little cloth bundles with hair and something that looked like dried flowers or herbs, and a book with writing like nothing I've ever seen. The pages weren't paper, felt more like skin, and there were pictures of 2 women with their bellies swollen standing over a man lying in a circle of soil. When Mrs. Michaels saw that, she started screaming about how they were watching her during her pregnancy, how they've been in my dreams. That's when they closed everything up and told us all to leave. Foster's article prompted a brief flurry of local interest in the Harkcourt story, but without access to the chest or its contents, the matter remained speculative. The home's new owners reported no unusual discoveries or experiences, and community interest soon waned. Academic interest, however, continued in certain circles. In 1997, Dr. Lydia Montgomery, an anthropologist specializing in syncretic religious practices of the antebellum South, published a paper titled Fertility Cults and Agricultural Magic, the Case of the Harkcourt Sisters. The paper drew connections between accounts of the Harkcourt plantation incidents and West African religious traditions that had survived the Middle Passage. The sisters' apparent pregnancy by an enslaved man, described as exceptionally literate and possessing knowledge from the old country, parallels other documented cases where African ritual specialists were sought out by plantation owners facing agricultural crises. She continued, "What distinguishes the Harkcourt case is the evidence suggesting a deliberate attempt to create offspring who would embody this spiritual merger, children who would serve as living conduits between the European ownership of the land and the African understanding of its spiritual essence." Montgomery wrote, "The fragmentary records of the Harkcourt case suggest not merely a taboo sexual relationship, but an attempted ritual merging of European and African spiritual practices focused on agricultural fertility. The subsequent generations of Harkcourt descendants, with their unusual agricultural successes, suggest this ritual may have achieved its intended purpose, creating a lineage with inherited spiritual authority over the land itself." Montgomery's paper was largely dismissed by mainstream academia as speculative, but it attracted attention from an unexpected quarter, a group of small-scale farmers from southern Georgia who approached her privately following a conference presentation. According to Montgomery's research diary, these farmers identified themselves as descendants of the Harkcourt sisters and Elijah Brooks, though none carried either surname. Her entry from February 18, 1998, records, "Met with 7 individuals claiming Harkcourt descent. diverse in appearance and apparent racial background, but all described identical birthmarks, interlocked circles on left shoulder. They confirmed family traditions of special connection to soil, ability to ensure fertility even in poor conditions. Most startling was their claim that this ability requires periodic renewal through ritual means, including the mixing of soil from Harkcourt land with bodily materials from Descendants. They requested my assistance in locating original Harkcourt property boundaries for an upcoming renewal they called the sesquicentennial returning. Montgomery initially agreed to help, seeing an opportunity for unprecedented anthropological documentation. However, her diary entries become increasingly disturbed in tone over subsequent weeks. Her final entry, dated March 23, 1998, reads, "Cannot proceed with this research. What they plan goes beyond cultural practice into something I cannot condone. The vessel they seek to create, I cannot be part of this. The dream last night, the sisters speaking through the soil into my mind, showing me what emerged from their bodies that December night in 1844. Not human, not fully. God help anyone who disturbs the sites they indicated. I've destroyed my maps and notes. Some knowledge should die with its keepers." Montgomery abruptly resigned her university position the following week and relocated to New Mexico, where she abandoned her anthropological work in favor of ceramic arts. When contacted by subsequent researchers interested in her Harkcourt work, she consistently refused to discuss the matter. The sesquicentennial returning Montgomery mentioned would have occurred in December 1998, 150 years after the Harkcourt sisters' disappearance. No unusual events were publicly reported in the area during that period, but water quality reports from the reservoir covering part of the original plantation show an unexplained spike in organic compounds in January 1999, which environmental officials attributed to runoff from holiday celebrations. In 2004, a subdivision resident named Karen Phillips began documenting unusual growth patterns in her garden as part of a master gardener program. Her soil samples, submitted for routine testing, were flagged for their unusual composition, particularly elevated levels of iron, calcium, and various trace minerals normally depleted in residential soils. More concerning were the unidentified organic compounds that initially confounded analysis. The university laboratory eventually determined that the soil contained human cellular material from multiple distinct genetic sources, preserved in viable condition far beyond normal decomposition timelines. Phillips was informed only that her soil contained unusual biological contaminants and advised to discontinue vegetable gardening. Phillips, however, connected with an independent researcher named Marcus Jackson, who had been studying the Harkcourt case as part of a broader investigation into what he termed bloodland bond practices in the antebellum South. Jackson arranged for more comprehensive testing of the soil samples through private laboratories. According to Jackson's unpublished manuscript titled "The Soil Remembers, Blood Rituals, and Land Consciousness in American Agriculture," and circulated only among trusted colleagues, the Phillips soil samples contained genetic material from at least 47 distinct individuals, spanning what DNA analysis suggests is 7 to 9 generations. More remarkably, these samples show clear evidence of intentional preservation through methods unknown to modern science. The cellular structures have been somehow stabilized, preventing normal decomposition while maintaining viability. Jackson continued. Most disturbing is the discovery of a non-human genetic sequence interwoven with the human DNA, a sequence that defies classification within known taxonomies. Preliminary analysis suggests similarities to certain fungal networks in its connective properties, but with unmistakably animal characteristics in other respects. This hybrid genetic material serves as a binding agent between the human genetic samples, creating what one colleague described as a living genealogical map preserved within the soil itself. Jackson's research remained unpublished in mainstream academic channels, but circulated among specialized researchers interested in ethnobotany and indigenous agricultural practices. His subsequent research proposals, seeking funding to expand soil sampling throughout the former Harkcourt property, were consistently rejected. In 2011, during an unusually severe drought, a portion of the reservoir covering the northeastern section of the original plantation temporarily receded, exposing the stone chamber discovered in 1964. Before authorities could prevent public access, several local residents entered the structure. Park Ranger incident reports describe finding 5 individuals inside the chamber, all unconscious but physically unharmed. Upon regaining consciousness, none could recall entering the chamber or what they had experienced inside. Medical examinations revealed no abnormalities except for elevated levels of dimethyltryptamine, DMT, in their bloodstreams, a compound associated with certain visionary states in various shamanic traditions. One individual, however, Joshua Turner, aged 27, appeared to experience lasting effects. According to medical records obtained by researcher Marcus Jackson through Freedom of Information requests, Turner exhibited unusual cognitive patterns during follow-up examinations, including the ability to identify soil samples from different locations while blindfolded and an apparent sensitivity to subtle geological features undetectable by standard equipment. Turner's personal journal, shared with Jackson during subsequent interviews, describes recurring dreams following his experience. "I see them clearly now, Amelia, Charlotte, and Elijah, not as separate people, but as a single organism spread across the land. Their bodies became vessels, then dissolved into something that flows through the soil itself, connecting everyone who carries their lineage. In the dreams, they speak about the great returning, when all branches will reunite. They say I must help prepare, that my bloodline makes me responsible. Last night I dreamed of 2 pregnant women standing in a circle of soil mixed with blood. They were singing to what grew inside them, but it wasn't. I can't bring myself to describe what I saw, yet I feel compelled to help them. God help me, I understand now why they did what they did. The land needed them." Turner subsequently relocated to a rural property that historical records identified as having been part of the original Harkcourt holdings. County agricultural reports note his surprising success in establishing crops considered unsuitable for Georgia's climate, achievements he attributed simply to traditional methods passed down through family. In 2017, genetic researcher Dr. Sophia Martinez became interested in the unusual clustering of certain rare genetic markers among families historically connected to the Benton County region. Her research, conducted through voluntary DNA sampling at regional heritage festivals, identified a distinct genetic signature shared by individuals from apparently unrelated families, a signature that included genetic sequences not typically found in human DNA. Martinez's paper, published in the Journal of Genetic Anthropology, carefully avoided direct connections to the Harkcourt case, instead focusing on the scientific implications of the unusual genetic markers. However, her research notes, accessed by journalist Michael Reynolds in 2022, contained more explicit observations. The shared genetic markers among descendants of families connected to the Harkcourt land exhibit properties more commonly associated with horizontal gene transfer in plants or certain simple organisms, a phenomenon not previously documented in human genetics. These sequences appear to facilitate unusual cellular communication and environmental adaptation, particularly related to soil chemistry and agricultural conditions. More concerning is the evidence suggesting these genetic sequences continue to evolve and spread through a mechanism I cannot identify through conventional genetic models. Martinez's research funding was discontinued following a university budget review, and her requests to expand the study were denied. She subsequently accepted a position with a private agricultural research corporation and no longer publicly discusses her findings regarding the Harkcourt descendants. In the decades since, the story of the Harkcourt sisters has remained a footnote in regional history, occasionally revived in sensationalized dark history tours or local ghost stories, but the deeper implications of what occurred on their plantation in 1844 remain largely unexplored in public discourse. Yet the land remembers. The crops on certain properties continue to flourish when others fail. Children born to families with connections to the original Harkcourt land still sometimes bear the distinctive birthmark of interlocked circles. And on certain nights, particularly when the moon is dark and the soil has been recently turned, those who walk the land that once belonged to Amelia and Charlotte Harkcourt sometimes report a strange sensation, as if something is listening from beneath their feet, as if the ground itself is somehow aware of their presence. The forbidden practices that began in 1844 never truly ended. They merely adapted, went underground, became embedded in the quiet traditions of families who understand that their connection to the land goes beyond mere ownership, that their very blood and the soil beneath them are part of a covenant established generations ago by two sisters and the man they purchased for purposes only partly understood even by themselves. Perhaps the true horror of the Harkcourt story lies not in what happened in that fateful year, but in its quiet continuation across time, the gradual, nearly imperceptible transformation of the land and the people connected to it into something neither fully human nor fully other, a hybrid entity that spans generations and defies conventional understanding. The Georgia sisters who bought a man for forbidden practices did more than violate the social taboos of their time. They initiated a process that continues to this day. A slow, patient merging of bloodlines and soil, of human and other, creating a legacy that flows like mycelia through the earth of what was once their plantation, binding together past and present, the living and the dead, in ways modern science has only begun to glimpse. And somewhere, perhaps Amelia and Charlotte Harkcourt still observe their handiwork, not as ghosts or spirits, but as consciousness preserved in soil and blood and the genetic memory of their descendants, waiting for the final phase of whatever plan they set in motion nearly 2 centuries ago. The true nature of that plan remains unknown. But those who study the case too closely often find themselves withdrawing from their research, like Dr. Montgomery and others before her, unable or unwilling to articulate what they've discovered. As Joshua Turner wrote in his final journal entry before his disappearance in 2019, the sisters weren't creating children. They were creating doorways, and what came through, what continues to come through, may one day walk among us openly. I can feel them beneath my feet as I write this, pulsing through the soil, reaching upward. They're almost ready. Turner's residence was found abandoned, his garden in full bloom, despite 3 weeks without rain. In the center of his property, investigators discovered a freshly dug pit, approximately 6 feet deep. Inside was only soil that, according to testing, contained genetic material from dozens of individuals spanning multiple generations, all somehow preserved in viable condition. The investigation was closed without conclusion. The property remains vacant, though locals report that plants continue to grow there with unusual vigor, even without human tending. And so the legacy of the Harkcourt sisters continues, flowing beneath the surface of ordinary life, like the roots of some vast, invisible organism connecting past to present, blood to soil, the known to the unknowable. Whatever Amelia and Charlotte Harkcourt conjured through their forbidden union with Elijah Brooks continues to thrive in the Georgia soil. Their descendants, some knowing, some unaware of their heritage, carry forward a lineage that is neither fully human nor fully other. The forbidden practices continue, the land remembers, the blood calls to blood across generations, and beneath the surface of the modern world, something ancient and patient continues to grow.